That subtle intuition is easy to distrust because we're trained to believe change is only real when it's visible and loud. We trust paperwork, official decisions, calendar events, external proof, but the mind often senses a transition before the external world reflects it. It notices the emotional distance first. It picks up on the way a conversation doesn't land the same way, or how a familiar environment suddenly feels a little too small, or how you're present at something you used to care about, and you're somehow not fully inside it. This doesn't mean you're cold, or broken, or ungrateful. It might simply mean your inner world is moving ahead, quietly, without asking permission. Long before life visibly changes, the mind often whispers that a chapter is already closing. The reason it feels confusing is that endings rarely announce themselves. Most transitions don't arrive with a clean moment of closure where you can point and say, "That's when it ended." Instead, they unfold slowly through fading interest, shifting priorities, and a kind of emotional detachment that you can't quite explain. The mind gradually lets go before circumstances catch up. You might still be in the same job, the same relationship, the same routine, but the emotional investment starts thinning out, almost like the color draining from something. It's not dramatic at first. It's just a small decrease in urgency, a little less adrenaline, a little less need to prove, a little less hunger for the old rewards. What feels like a problem in this stage is often just the early movement of transition, the mind loosening its grip while your life remains the same on the surface. This is also why people often mislabel what they're experiencing. If you don't have language for quiet endings, you assume something is wrong with you. You assume you've lost motivation, lost passion, lost gratitude, lost discipline. But sometimes you haven't lost anything. Sometimes your psyche is simply withdrawing energy from a structure that no longer fits. The nervous system and the brain are constantly predicting where your attention should go and what should matter, and those predictions are shaped by your identity. When identity shifts, the brain updates its priorities, and the old incentives stop lighting up in the same way. The world hasn't changed yet, but your interpretation of it has, and interpretation is where meaning lives. Letting go, even when something no longer feels right, can be unsettling for a very human reason. Familiar routines don't just fill time, they give you orientation. They tell you who you are. They give you a sense of stability, a sense that you know how to move through your day without thinking too much. When those routines begin dissolving, the mind experiences a temporary loss of direction, and the body often feels it before you can explain it. Restlessness, a vague anxiety, a sense that you're drifting. You might find yourself holding on to situations that have already run their course, not because you love them, but because they're familiar enough to keep the nervous system calm. The discomfort of an ending often comes less from the thing itself and more from losing the identity attached to it. The version of you who knew exactly how to behave there, how to be safe there, how to be recognized there. This is the part people don't always say out loud. Sometimes you're not afraid of change itself. You're afraid of being undefined. There's a specific vulnerability in not knowing what role you play anymore. If you've been the reliable one, the achiever, the caretaker, the calm one, the funny one, the one who never needs too much, then letting go of the context that reinforced that role can feel like stepping into open air. The mind wants to grab onto something quickly because uncertainty registers as threat. Even positive growth can trigger anxiety because the brain prefers predictability over truth in the short term. It will choose a familiar discomfort over an unfamiliar freedom simply because it knows how to survive the familiar. When your inner world starts moving ahead of your external life, you begin thinking differently. You question things you once accepted without effort. You notice the assumptions underneath your choices. You notice how much of your behavior was built around approval, security, or status, even if you wouldn't have used those words before. This is not a condemnation of your past. It's just clarity arriving. What once felt normal can start to feel limiting, not because it's objectively bad, but because your perspective has evolved. It's like updating the operating system on a device and realizing certain apps don't run the same way anymore. The environment hasn't changed, but you have. And now parts of your life that once felt natural may start to feel incomplete. A common sign that this is happening is the silent process of emotional detachment. Before major life changes happen, emotional distance often appears first. You start observing situations instead of being fully fused with them. Reactions soften. Urgency fades. The mind begins pulling back, not as an act of rejection, but as preparation. You can still do what you've always done, but you feel less possessed by it. You can still have the same conversations, but you notice the patterns more than you feel the drama. You can still show up, but there's an inner witness now, watching the old choreography without the same hunger to perform it perfectly. This detachment can scare people because it feels like loss, but it can also be the psyche protecting you. If you were emotionally attached to something that is no longer aligned, your mind may need to loosen the bond before you can move. It's easier to step away from a door when you're no longer gripping the handle with your whole body. Emotional detachment is sometimes the mind's way of preparing you for what's about to end, not by giving you a dramatic sign, but by slowly lowering the volume on the attachment so the transition doesn't shatter you all at once. And yet, even with all of this happening internally, many people ignore the signals, not because they're foolish, but because the mind loves stability. When subtle signals of change appear, people often try to silence them. They distract themselves, they double down on routines, they add more productivity, more stimulation, more noise, more plans, more self-improvement, anything that creates the feeling of control. They convince themselves nothing is wrong, because admitting that something is ending would force them to face uncertainty. But unresolved inner signals rarely disappear on their own. They tend to return, softer at first, then more persistent, like water seeping through a wall you keep repainting. Sometimes ignoring the signals even creates a specific kind of fatigue. You might notice that you're tired in a way sleep doesn't solve. Not physically exhausted, but psychologically overdrawn. That's often what happens when you spend energy maintaining a life that your awareness is already outgrowing. The performance costs more than it used to, because a deeper part of you isn't convinced anymore. Ignoring the feeling that something is ending doesn't stop the transition. It only delays the understanding of it, and delayed understanding tends to make the process feel harsher than it needs to be. If you're in this phase, it can help to hold one counterintuitive idea. Confusion is not always a sign you're lost. Sometimes it's a sign you're between maps. The mind loves maps. It wants labels, plans, certainty, a clear narrative. But deep transitions often arrive as a quiet fog because the old map no longer fits and the new map hasn't been drawn yet. That in-between can feel like emptiness, like loss, like nothing is happening. But sometimes it's just the space where your priorities are reorganizing. In a grounded sense, this is your attention recalibrating. Attention is one of the most honest signals you have. You can force your behavior for a while, but you can't fake attention forever. If your attention keeps drifting away from something you used to care about, it might not be laziness. It might be the psyche refusing to keep investing in what no longer matches your internal direction. There's also a grief hidden in this process that people don't always expect. Even when you know something doesn't fit anymore, you can miss it. You can miss the simplicity of not questioning. You can miss the old version of you who could chase something without feeling the hollowness underneath. You can miss relationships, routines, environments, even certain anxieties because they were familiar enough to be grounding. This grief doesn't mean you made a mistake. It can simply mean you're human and you're letting something real pass. The mind sometimes needs to mourn an identity the same way it mourns a relationship, because identities are attachments too. They hold memories, pride, coping strategies, and versions of safety. If you want something practical that doesn't turn this into another self-improvement project, it can help to create a small moment of honesty each day, the kind that your nervous system can tolerate. You might try choosing one routine moment, something ordinary, like when you're about to answer a message, start work, or fall into distraction, and ask quietly, "What am I trying to keep stable right now?" Then notice the first sensation in your body before your mind explains it. Tightness in the chest, a clench in the stomach, a quickened breath, or maybe a surprising softness. You don't need to judge the answer or act on it immediately. The point is simply to stop gaslighting the signal. The mind is often whispering long before it starts shouting, and learning to respect the whisper can make the transition less violent. Because every ending has a beginning hidden inside it, even when it doesn't feel that way at first. When one chapter dissolves, a period of uncertainty usually follows, and uncertainty can feel like emptiness. But emptiness is also space. Space is what allows something new to form without being squeezed into the old shape. At first, the space may feel like loss or confusion, but it can also be room for clarity and direction to arrive in a more honest way. What replaces the ending often reflects who you are becoming, not who you used to be. That's why this phase can feel so delicate. You're not just changing circumstances, you're changing the internal compass that chooses circumstances. It's worth saying gently that you don't have to force a conclusion just to relieve discomfort. You don't have to make a dramatic decision to prove that you're growing. Sometimes the work is quieter, noticing the emotional distance without panicking, letting routines loosen without immediately replacing them with new ones, allowing yourself to feel slightly out of place without turning it into a personal failure. The paradox is that the more you stop trying to get back to the exact person you were, the more you make room for the person you're becoming to feel real. And real change usually doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like a slow, steady shift in what you can no longer pretend to want. So if you've been feeling that subtle intuition lately, that nothing dramatic has happened, but something inside is moving, it may help to see it as a kind of inner weather change. The air shifts before the rain arrives. The light changes before the season turns. Long before life visibly changes, the mind often whispers that a chapter is already closing. Endings are rarely sudden. They usually arrive quietly, disguised as subtle emotional shifts. The discomfort doesn't always mean you're making a mistake. Sometimes it means you're losing an identity that kept you oriented. And the feeling that something is ending can be the quiet signal that your life is preparing for its next chapter, not as a demand to rush, but as a permission to stop gripping what your inner world has already begun to release.